Hi, King Dan here. This video is Registration, Succession, and the Political Constitution. Before I begin, I just wanted to mention that I made this video to really show how these three elements are kind of connected in this linear providence that Father was fulfilling in the last several decades of his life. And if you understand the entirety of providence, it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. But specifically, he lays out a certain pattern of events that will play out in the future. And then as these events are carrying out, we didn't necessarily notice them while he was alive. But if we look at them in hindsight, it's very clear this linear or straight line of providence is actually completely intact. So this video is just, I wanted to show at least one element that I can see. All right, so registration and succession. In 1983, True Father says, "Until you become registered as citizens in the kingdom of heaven for eternity, you must unite with the whole family of true parents." And I'll skip to the bold sections. "After that registration is done, True Father will appoint his successor. That successor must be known to all of the Unification Church, all the blessed families, and the true parents' family. They must all unanimously accept him. Once that successor is determined, the law or constitution of the heavenly kingdom shall be laid down to guide all activities." And I'll read this. The law will guide heavenly citizens here on earth and into the kingdom of heaven in heaven. I thought this was really interesting because if you read this, it says basically before you're registered as a citizen of the kingdom of heaven, you really have to unite with true parents and the true parents' whole family. However, once you're registered as a citizen of the kingdom of God, you're part of true parents' family. You're a child of God in a literal physical sense. So it's interesting to note that after the establishment of the citizen of God, you're a co-heir with Christ. You don't need to follow any member of true parents. You're responsible for following God and Christ in your own life and through the Word. I also think it's interesting that it says after the registration is done, it says True Father will appoint his successor. It doesn't say anybody else will appoint it. In fact, if you look at it, it makes it very clear that True Father is saying everyone needs to unanimously accept this person. And then, third point, once the successor is determined, then the law or constitution shall be laid to guide all activities. I'll mention this here. So it doesn't actually say that the constitution will be released by the successor, but it says very, very soon after, once the successor is determined, then the constitution will actually be released. So, and also there's two types of constitutions. Father did actually lay the constitution for the kingdom of heaven. It's basically the 8 great textbooks. He says it's the family pledge. Sometimes he says it's divine principle. Sometimes it says Cheong, but we understand that there is an internal and an external Cheong. There's Father's speeches saying so. But overall, what this is saying is Father's really releasing this and saying this in 1983 toward the future, saying registration is coming where you will be registered as citizens of Christ's kingdom, and that it's going to come relevant, or this period of time is relevant to the appointment of a successor. And everyone, including true parents' own family, has to unanimously accept him at that time. Registered citizens of Cheon. So we fast forward here to 2006. True Father says, "Beloved citizens of Cheon, today you are receiving an amazing grace. You are being registered as citizens of Cheon, not only you, but also your ancestors by the tens of thousands." So this is the day he was referring to 23 years previously. So in 1983 to 2006, everything he was doing was beeline for this day, right? This is the day you become a citizen of Cheon. Sure, it hasn't been established politically, but that actually doesn't matter. If you understand politics, or if you understand the dynamics at play here, whether or not a government recognizes you as a child of God doesn't make a difference to your status as a child of God or as a citizen of that kingdom to begin with. So it's really fighting from the victory of Father says Cheon has been established. Father says you're now a citizen of Cheon. Then the ramifications actually come from that victory, come from that stand from a victory. And it's not fighting for a victory like a lot of people want to do with the kingdom of heaven. So now that registration happened, if you remember the first slide, it says, after that's done, then the successor will be crowned. So this is several passages that he said in 2008, 2009, and 2010. So I got different years just to show that he's been pretty consistent on the successionship for quite a while. It says, Hyung Jin Nim and Yeon Lee, these two, this son and daughter, a couple, are standing in the front of true parents. At this time of transition today, this occasion is one where they can inherit authority as the representatives and inheritors who can attend to everything on behalf of true parents. In 2009, he says, I transfer and pass on the blessing of true parents to this couple. And then 2010, he says, the command center of cosmic peace and unity is the absolute and unique command center. Its representative and heir is Hyung Jin Nim. Anybody else would be a heretic and one who would bring things to destruction. The speech in 2009 was actually held 3 times. And on the second time, I think it was held on the same day on 2 different continents, one in America, one in Korea. So it wasn't like this is just some, let's throw this under the cover when he dies kind of thing. This was something that he was planning for decades, probably since the Garden of Eden, hint, hint. And this is something that actually he was trying to make abundantly clear for us while it was progressing, but unfortunately not a lot of people really took it to heart. It's clear in hindsight if you can read. And this was not just Hyung Jin Nim being crowned the heir and the representative of father, but this was as a couple, this couple with Hyung Jin Nim and his wife Yeon Nim actually becoming the body of true parents with the full authority of true parents while they're on earth. You may remember that Hyung Jin Nim is the first person, the only person, to actually conduct a public blessing ceremony with father not even present. Now, if you think about it, that's actually kind of a big deal. Father's alive, and father's telling Hyung Jin Nim, you do the blessing without me. You go do it. It's father actually raising Hyung Jin Nim through this training of, I want you to take my place, not as a Christ, not being Christ, there's only one Christ, but in the responsibilities as a fatherly position or as a older son position, as a father passes this on from one generation to the next. It would be hard-pressed for you to find any public ceremony where father didn't have at least a representative of true mother on stage. So this is something that certainly Hyung Jin Nim is the successor of true father, but also as a couple, Yeon Nim and together with Hyung Jin become the representatives of true parents. Anybody else, if you look at the last one, anybody else, including the former bride of true father, anybody else would be considered a heretic and one who brings things to destruction. And we're actually seeing that play out. Constitutional parameters. Before I begin, just remember the context for this. The context is father said registration as citizens would happen, and then after that you'd have a successor, and then after the successor you'd have the release of the Constitution. So I put this slide in here really to show you that there are some parameters that father set of what this Constitution would look like. For instance, he says, Article 1 of the Constitution of the Kingdom of Heaven is that you will not stain the blood lineage. The second point is to not violate human rights. And the third point is to not steal public money using public property for yourself. And then he also says in the Divine Principle, the 3 branches of government in the ideal world, the legislative, judicial, and executive branches will interact in a harmonious and and principled relationships when they follow God's guidance as conveyed through Christ and the people of God. So clearly he mentions in the first section that you're not going to have anything to, it's going to have something to do with not violating blood lineage, human rights, and then public property. And then in the second paragraph, it says it's structured as a legislative and judicial and executive branch. Now, if in the context that this particular section talks about is talking about the separation of powers, and it's talking specifically about the Cain type and Abel type separation of powers as seen through the United States of America and the French Revolution. So, and then it says that Abel is America and then Cain is France, and God naturally works through the Abel figure. So if the Abel constitution or this Abel function or these functions of government follow an Abel path, then you can expect that the constitution that's going to be released that's based on this divine principle and the legislative judicial branches will extend providence to an even greater level of freedom and protection of human rights as compared to even that of the United States of America. I hope that made sense. It's actually not that hard to understand, but you really have to deal with reality and the spiritual fog around government, around church, around businesses to really see how, if you have a true, honest relationship with Christ, you are free and above all creations of man and government, specifically as being the highest and the highest form of archangel and the one most liable to violate human rights. All right, constitutional comparison. Before I begin, just remember the context. The context is, Father said registration of citizenship will happen. That happened. A successor has been crowned. That happened. And then after the successor, a constitution will be released. And I didn't show you anything related to when the constitutions themselves, but I showed you the parameters that Father defined as being for this constitution. So in Sanctuary and Family Fed, it's actually really easy to see the visions that both Hyung Jin Nim and Cheon have for the future. If we do a quick comparison, one side, Sanctuary, you have the Constitution was released by Hyung Jin Nim, who is what? The crowned successor of True Father, the representative of true parents. Okay? And then on the other side, you have one that's released by Cheon, who, if you look at what happened in the events leading up to what Father wanted to be Foundation Day, she revealed herself as completely fulfilling the prophecy in the Bible known as the Mystery of Babylon or the Whore of Babylon. So you have this choice of, well, I can support Hyung Jin Nim, the crowned successor of Father, or I can support Cheon, the revealing of the Whore of Babylon. Okay, now the next point, in Sanctuary, Hyung Jin Nim released the Constitution in October 2015, and in Family Fed, their Constitution was released on February 12th, 2014. Both of these actually qualify because both of these are after the successor has been established back in 2008, 2009, 2010. So both of these, I'll give Family Fed a little credit here. So if we look at the constitutions that they present, one extends biblical providence, one ignores it almost completely. So in Sanctuary, it's based on the completed testament, but it also recognized the foundations laid by the Old Testament, New Testament, and the 8th grade textbook, which is the completed testament. Whereas Family Fed doesn't even have the divine principle. It ignores biblical providence. An example of biblical providence is just the founding of the United States. There is a spiritual providence. However, the political providence is typically just right there, working and intertwined with the spiritual providence. It's a very clear and very important distinction because as you gain spiritual understanding, as you understand God's will, you'll naturally lessen your relationship with the government. You understand you're free from God, you're a child of God, and no man-made creation can actually violate this biblical principled understanding. So extending biblical providence on the Sanctuary side is easy because it takes the basis of the American Constitution, which Father said was the structure and basis of an ideal society, the three branches of government. Now, you contrast that with Family Fed. They make things up and they use Father's words, and they kind of twist Father's words, pretending that it's Father's words, but really it's just their manipulation. And it doesn't include Old or New Testament. It barely includes Father's words because it distorts the actual spirit of Father's words to make the conclusions that it wants to make. And that actually connects with the next one where it says rights come from God versus in Family Fed, rights come from government. If your rights come from God because you're a child of God for no other reason but because you're a child of God, then whether or not government recognizes you doesn't actually matter. You're a free person. So in the example of sanctuary, it clearly delineates that rights come from God and no government can violate those rights. Whereas in Family Fed, it says the rights come from government. And actually, if you understand it, watch the other videos, that means you have government-run privileges, and anything that can be given to you by government can be taken away. Now, that's very scary because that's a man-made contract with an institution that actually doesn't respect my lineage-based understanding of citizenship, which means I have no rights whatsoever. So in Sanctuary, in conclusion, it says it honors God's words, where in Family Fed, it just ignores God's words entirely. God's will is absolute, unique, and eternal. And in Sanctuary, Hyung Jin really tried to honor his father, and it actually, if you read everything, it actually fulfills and honors God's words in establishing the political kingdom on earth. And in Family Fed, it just kind of like, okay, true Father worked decades. When he dies, we'll just kind of ignore it and do our own thing. So, I hope this video makes sense. It's really not that hard. It's not meant to be demeaning or anything, but it's 1 + 1 = 2. You can see the straight line of providence if you read Father's words, trying to look what Father was actually doing, right? Back in the 80s, he said, this will happen. And then in the mid-2000s, it happened. And then later on, still more things happen, and as you look at it in hindsight, it's very easy to see which side is actually extending providence, which side is leaving people more free as an individual, a child of God, to build and to do all the spiritual constitutional responsibilities, having a relationship with God's word. And then in Family Fed side, which side really is just following the whore of Babylon, who prostituted herself to power and no other thing. So I hope this video makes sense, and thank you.